Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We warmly welcome you all to Making Global Goals Local Business, or MGGLB Sri Lanka. My name is Janani Vijaythunga, and I'm the Network Manager of UN Global Compact Network Sri Lanka, and I will be your MC over the course of this virtual event. The United Nations Global Compact is the world's largest corporate sustainability initiative and consists of several local networks. As a special initiative of the UN Secretary General, the United Nations Global Compact is a call to companies everywhere to align their operations and strategies with 10 universally accepted principles in the areas of human rights, labor, environment, and anti-corruption, and to take action in support of UN goals. The UN Global Compact Network Sri Lanka has been inspiring corporates to integrate sustainability strategies for 15 years, since 2006. MGGLB Sri Lanka is part of a 5-year campaign to drive forward the UN Global Compact's mission to mobilize a global movement of sustainable companies and stakeholders, taking radical, ambitious, and decisive actions to change our trajectory. In collaboration with the United Nations in Sri Lanka, UNDP Sri Lanka, and the Sustainable Development Council of Sri Lanka, MGGLB Sri Lanka will bring together local and global leaders from business, civil society, government, Global Compact local networks, and the United Nations to inform, inspire, and catalyze collective approaches in Sri Lanka. We would like to bring our attention to a few housekeeping rules prior to commencing the opening session. Simultaneous single and Tamil language interpretation will be available throughout this virtual event, and we encourage all attendees to utilize this facility if preferred. The interpretation option is available at the bottom portion of your screen. All sessions are interactive, and we encourage attendees to use the chat box and Q&A functions to post questions and comments to the session panelists. Please tag UN Global Compact Network Sri Lanka and your participation in MGGLB Sri Lanka when sharing on social media. The Network Sri Lanka social media handles are available in the chat box. To start off the opening session of MGGLB Sri Lanka, it is my pleasure to welcome Mr. Ratika De Silva, Executive Director of UN Global Compact Network Sri Lanka. Mr. Ratika De Silva, over to you for your opening remarks.
Resident Representative UNDP Robert Jocam, CEO and Executive Director UN Global Compact Sando Jambo, Chairman UN Global Compact Sri Lanka Dilan Fernando, members of the Board Global Compact Network Sri Lanka, distinguished speakers representing 8 countries and over 50 institutions, and the 800+ attendees who join us today. It is an honor to welcome you to Making Global Goals Local Business Sri Lanka. This virtual conference aims to shape the future of business by driving local solutions to global environmental, social, and economic challenges, paving the way for how responsible business, anchored in the 10 principles of UN Global Compact and the Sustainable Development Goals, can create new market opportunities and accelerate action towards achieving the 2030 agenda. In the past 21 years since its beginning, the UN Global Compact has been relentlessly promoting its 10 principles for corporate sustainability to help enhance business performance and governance standards across the world. These principles focus on business and human rights, labor, environmental sustainability, and anti-corruption, 4 vital areas that must matter to business and its stakeholders. Today, within our own network in Sri Lanka are businesses that volunteered nearly 20 years ago to adhere to these principles, and they were bold and quick in integrating these principles into their business strategy and risk management processes, and soon excelled in not only securing, but also strengthening their corporate and brand reputation to be the benchmark in sustainability in Sri Lanka. Their commitment continued to grow over the years, and today, these companies play a lead role in Global Compact in Sri Lanka's key initiatives that are climate action with a strong focus on achieving net zero, gender diversity, sustainable finance, business and human rights, and sustainable supply chains, with water and SMEs to be included very soon. What makes this event special is that these sessions are carefully curated to deliver value to business while contributing invaluably to achieving the global goals Sri Lanka has committed to. Another reason is that the outcomes of these sessions will determine the way forward to deliver greater value to corporate sustainability and governance. Almost every session of this event is moderated by a board director of the Global Compact Network Sri Lanka, and the session rapporteurs are the heads of the relevant working groups. Being the decade of action, this event is themed Shaping Future Business. How responsibly we nurture our brands will determine the future of business. And in the next 2 days, you should realize that it is not an option, but indeed the reality. Leaving you with 2 exciting days that we hope you will enjoy. Let me now hand over the proceedings to Janani Wijetunga, Network Manager, Network of Network Sri Lanka, who will be your host for the next 2 days. Thank you.
Mr. Ratika De Silva, for your insightful opening remarks. Up next, we warmly welcome Ms. Sando Jambo, CEO and Executive Director of UN Global Compact, to deliver her message on MGGLB Sri Lanka. Ms. Sando Jambo, over to you.
Greetings from New York. I'm Sando Jambo, the CEO and Executive Director of the United Nations Global Compact. I would like to thank those of you who have worked so hard to help make this Making Global Goals Local Business event possible. Thank you for inviting me. I'm pleased to have the opportunity to join you virtually from our offices and also to issue an important call to action to Sri Lankan business leaders. I'd like to express special gratitude to the UN Resident Coordinator's Office for its continuous support of the UN Global Compact and for championing the way forward. This important convening was made possible through the organizational efforts of the working group chaired by the representative from the RC's office, Mr. Azam Bakir Markar. This exemplifies true collaboration, the sort that we endeavor to see take place between UN resident coordinators and Global Compact local networks. Due to the size of its economy and the opportunities, Sri Lanka has the potential to drive advancements in sustainable development at a regional and global scale. The country plays a critical role in making global goals a reality. I would like to take a couple of minutes to highlight a few key features of the UN Global Compact's new strategy that I think will help drive further success in Sri Lanka, and we call them the 5 strategic shifts. The first centers around balanced growth of our local and regional networks, which speaks to the UN Global Compact's plans to expand its reach to an additional 20 to 25 countries over the next 3 years. Beyond this geographic expansion, we also plan to increase our participation among business partners beyond the more than 13,000 companies that have already joined the initiative. Of course, we look forward to expanding our partnerships with Sri Lanka businesses and will count on your support to reach new companies. The second strategic shift is for stronger, more active engagement with our UN partners, especially at the local level. In this spirit, I again reiterate our thanks to Mr. Azam and his team for their crucial support in bringing us together so that we can roll up our sleeves and discuss the practicalities of how business can make a real difference. We see enormous potential for the UN country team, the Global Compact Network, and Sri Lankan businesses to work together towards creating an economy that innovates, that generates employment, and that ensures principled business and sustainable development. Our third shift in our new strategy calls for harnessing the collective power of small and medium-sized enterprises, or SMEs. We're developing a number of initiatives and projects specifically with SMEs in mind, and I look forward to welcoming Sri Lankan businesses into the UN Global Compact to address our 10 universal principles on human rights, labor, the environment, and anti-corruption. Our fourth strategic shift focuses on specific, measurable targets with an enhanced reporting framework, one that holds participating companies accountable on the progress that they are making. Our aim is to move companies faster and further along the SDG progress line, revealing progress on corporate sustainability and responsible business practices. This theme is particularly relevant to this Making Global Goals local business event. Global Compact Network Sri Lanka has been at the forefront of providing local delivery of global programs and active support for public-private partnerships. And this leads us to our final and perhaps most important shift in strategy, which is driving and measuring impact across our 10 principles and priority SDG areas. Priorities that are important and relevant to this discussion and where business has a crucial role to play. It is time to make global goals local business across all of Sri Lanka, and I invite you to make the most of this event. It's time to take the work forward, bringing the SDGs into your workplace, your discussions, and into your broader visions of operating responsible businesses. I have no doubt that this event will inspire and catalyze meaningful conversations around achieving and accelerating the progress that we need to make together as we unite in the business of a better world. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Sando Jambo, for your encouraging remarks. Next, we will hear from Ms. Hannah Singer, UN Resident Coordinator for Sri Lanka, on the SDGs, the challenges and opportunities. Ms. Hannah Singer, the stage is yours.
All right. A very good morning to everybody. Really good, a very early morning from where I am, but it really gives me great pleasure to participate in this very important event. So let me start by greeting Mr. Secretary, Ministry of Economic Policies and Plan International, Mr. Anusha Palpita, Chairman, UN Global Compact Network of Sri Lanka, Mr. Dilan, Fernando, UNDP Resident Representative in Sri Lanka, Robert Jocam, colleagues from the UN Global Compact in Sri Lanka, my dear friends, my dear ladies and gentlemen. I'm glad to be joining you virtually for our discussion on developing a business roadmap to advance the Sustainable Development Goals. So last week, in addressing the Global Investors for Sustainable Development Alliance in New York, the Secretary General said, as private sector leaders, you have a great responsibilities. Our goals are clear. Build a sustainable, net zero, resilient, and equitable world. Better align investment with sustainable development and act on our commitments. This morning, we are all also gathered here to take on and further this responsibility and forge ahead a clear path to achieving the 2030 agenda for the SDG with credible timelines, targets, and plans that can really make an impact for our Sri Lanka. Now, across the United Nations system, there is a renewed emphasis on partnering, as was just said, with responsible business to deliver sustainable development on the ground. We have seen significant progress since the creation of the UN Global Compact in 2000 on working with businesses to apply their creativity and their innovations towards solving the sustainable development challenges. However, we still have a long way to go if we are to deliver for people and the planet a more equitable and sustainable future. Now, many of you are familiar with the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development as they apply to the corporate sector. But why do we care? We know that the SDG provide businesses for an opportunity for growth. Let me note a few reasons why sustainable development is a mutually beneficial roadmap for our common journey. First, we know that business success and development success are not mutually exclusive. For instance, the majority of companies benefit from operating in healthy, thriving societies with effective infrastructure, good governance, and predictable policy environment. Second, the SDG provides a framework for businesses to engage in ethical business practice. Today, all employees, customers, and wider stakeholders believe that businesses have a legitimate and important role to play in tackling wider social, economic, and environmental challenges. Third, a commitment to finding solutions for the SDG challenges can provide businesses with opportunities for growth and innovations. Now, why are we talking about it now? This afternoon, I want to challenge you to move a step forward and look at how we re-envision the future of the SDGs and implementation by the corporate sector in the wake of the pandemic. The recently released Our Common Agenda by the Secretary General seeks to accelerate achievements of the goals, not least in light of the gaps and delays caused by COVID-19 pandemic. Actions already underway to achieve the goals will in turn be key for the implementation of our common agenda. Three approaches we could take moving forward in our rebuilding and re-envisioning could be: one, the COVID-19 pandemic is only the latest reminder of our vulnerability to economic shocks. Therefore, we need to correct what we call our blind spot of judging economic success by narrow short-term measures of profit and growth, and the incentive of business practices that puts stakeholders' short-term interests above those of the other stakeholders. Second, we need improved business models to better connect businesses, markets, and society. With a strong, sustainable business are built on global values, including, as the speaker at the beginning said, human and labor rights, environmental sustainability, and fighting corruption, all of which are embodied in the United Nations Global Compact, the Global Compact. So coordinated actions by the business community to align business practice with global goals is absolutely critical as we build in COVID-19. And I'm really very pleased with this forum today and tomorrow, because we're really following and trying to dive deep into these issues. Now, the third point is that we need private sector commitments to ensure responsible innovations and to harnessing technology fairly. This is vital to ensure that business models of the future support inclusion, human rights, and sustainable development. As always, the United Nations and Sri Lanka is your partner in these endeavors, and we look forward in working with you, with all of you, to help realize the Sustainable Development Goals in the next 10 years, and also to re-envision our pathway towards them in light of the pandemic. Now, the UN in Sri Lanka is pleased to partner with the Global Compact Network Sri Lanka, Sustainable Development Council, and of course, with UNDP on making global goals local business Sri Lanka, and look forward to the sessions over the next 2 days. We are, as the Secretary General said, at an inflection point in history, and we need partnership to ensure that we build a better, safer, and above all, fairer future together. Thank you all, and have a wonderful, wonderful forum.
Thank you, Ms. Singer, for outlining strategies to achieve the SDGs on the road to 2030. Our next intervention will be from Mr. Dilan Fernando, CEO of Dilmati and Chairman of UN Global Compact Network Sri Lanka, who will highlight the role of business in moving forward the 2030 agenda. Mr. Dilan Fernando, over to you.
Good morning, everyone. Secretary Palpita, my colleagues both at UN and UNGC, Ms. Hannah Singer, Robert Jocam. Thank you for joining us. You know, in this incredible time, we have seen, and I don't need to remind you how much the world has changed. But what is important about these changes that we have seen is that they are truly global in nature. The problems that we face are global problems, whether they are a health crisis, environmental crisis, economic crisis. And so their global nature demands that we take a fundamentally different approach. In the past, business has been somewhat disconnected from some of these issues. But what we realize is that the scale of this issue must start with where Hannah ended her invitation to collaboration. It must start with collaboration. The science is very clear. We see every day on opening the newspapers, we see the science about the situation in the world, whether it is a health, economic, environmental crisis. We see a fundamental shift in markets because consumers are demanding, not requesting, but demanding and insisting on sustainability in a wider sense, whether it is gender, whether it is social, or whether environmental compliance. In fact, the very definition of capitalism has been reminded to us as being the creation of value across several different areas. And that includes natural capital, social capital, and not simply commercial capital, which must be achieved as a combination of all three. It is about conserving our resources because ultimately biodiversity, the ecosystem services that biodiversity offers, they are the building blocks for what comes next. It's also about our survival, because in a very genuine sense, whether you look at the markets and what consumers demand, or whether you look at the existential crisis that we are confronting, we have a situation where it makes it very, very clear that the future requires us to act more sustainably, to look with a very different perspective. And truly it is the inflection point that Hannah reminded us of. And so what are the 10 principles of the UN about? Well, quite simply, when you look at ending extreme poverty, is that a principle to be guided by, or is that a fundamental human right? It's about fighting inequality. It's about fighting injustice and protecting our planet, the resources that we need for future growth, the resources that we are obliged to pass on to the next generation. And so I think what is clear is that the companies that choose to embrace these principles will chart the future, will define the future in a very real sense. The awareness is there, but the inflection point that was referred to by several early speakers is that we need now to translate that awareness, that knowledge that is available in abundance into action. And that's what this discussion, these 2 days are about. Businesses often think of sustainability as a cost, but that's because we have been living an 18th century definition, an 18th century framework for business. You can say 18th or 19th century, but regardless, it is an outdated concept. And therefore, in being unsustainable, any business is being parasitic upon its environment and upon the community in which it operates. I'm sharing these fairly strong words for a simple reason, that every day, every week, there is new research that reminds us that we need to act to protect our world. That means we need to act to protect ourselves, protect our way of life, perhaps an amended way of life, but nevertheless to protect it for us and for future generations. And so my request to you in this 2 days when we are going to focus on shaping the future is to please remember that whether the people that we are seeking to protect from poverty or injustice, or whether the planet that we are seeking to protect and nurture, it is about building for the future. It is about finding a new paradigm that is a 21st century paradigm that takes our resources, our environment into consideration in looking to the future, in building for the future. With that, I would like to thank my colleagues. We have an amazing organizing team. I would like to thank the speakers. We have 60 speakers, 30 male and 30 female. wonderful achievement. And we have a team led by Azam. We have Ratika, Janani, Amjad, we have Mariam, we have Zach, we have Amanti, we have Yasangi, Kishore, Nirantare, Fadil, Nadia, and Tamindri. Please forgive me for only mentioning your first names in the interest of time, but thank you. And to everyone who is participating, thank you for joining us. Remember, we are genuinely at the inflection point. I'm mentioning it for the third time because it is so very important. The world has spoken, science has spoken. Now it's up to us as businesses to build the collaboration, the partnership that is going to help translate that awareness into action. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Fernando, for highlighting the important role business has to play in moving forward the 2030 agenda. Our next speaker is Mr. Anusha Palpita, Secretary to the Ministry of Economic Policy and Plan Implementation and Chairman of the Development Lottery Board, who will elaborate on the progress of the National Action Plan on Agenda 2030. Mr. Palpita, the stage is yours.
Thank you. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning. First, let me express my thanks to Global Compact Sri Lanka Network for inviting me to speak today at the opening session of this conference. It is my understanding that this dialogue is a part of multi-layer strategy of the UN Global Compact designed to drive business awareness and action in support achieving the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. Our government is committed to achieving the SDGs. Sri Lanka has set its own national targets driven by the global level ambition. Our national policy framework, Vistas for Prosperity and Splendor, very effectively incorporates the three dimensions of sustainability and clearly lays down the pathway to achieve our global SDG commitments. Some key strategic policy commitments that are worthy of mention are our commitment to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 14.5% for the period of 2021 to 2030, to achieve 70% renewable energy in electricity generation by 2030, and to make no capacity addition to coal power plants, and to achieve carbon neutrality in electricity generation by 2050 and carbon neutrality by 2060. Government has also taken steps to strengthen institutional coordination mechanism for vertical and horizontal coherence in planning, implementation, and monitoring. At the Interministerial Steering Committee, under the leadership of the Prime Minister, has been established to provide the political leadership and the overall guidance to the SDG implementation process, as well as to mobilize all stakeholders towards to SDGs by building a strong national ownership of the SDG agenda. Furthermore, dedicated coordination platforms have been established to accelerate the progress on areas that require more focused intervention and coordinated action. These include establishment of dedicated presidential task force for economic revival and poverty alleviation, educational reforms, sustainable solution to climate change, greenhouse agriculture, as well as ministerial level steering committees for SDG 3 and SDG 60. These would undoubtedly help address sector-specific bottlenecks as well as mitigate potential COVID-19 impact and accelerate SDG progress through integrated approaches and multi-stakeholder partnerships. We have also taken important steps to strengthen SDG monitoring and review mechanism towards this and to further strengthen SDG data governance and the management system. The Sustainable Development Council has developed and launched National SDG Data Portal, which is an integrated reporting platform based on a whole government approach. The data revolution would ensure that planning and budgeting process are based on a scientific criteria. The socio-economic impacts of COVID-19 are greatest challenges for Sri Lanka in our progress towards SDGs. Despite the challenges, we have seen progress in Sri Lanka SDG attainment in several areas. This clearly depicted in the 2021 Global Sustainable Development Report. Sri Lanka has improved its global rank by 7 positions and it placed at 87th place and out of 165 countries in 2021. Overall country score has increased to 68.1, which is well above the regional average. Sri Lanka shows significant progress in achieving goal number 1 on no poverty, goal number 4 on quality education, goal number 13 on climate action, and compared to previous years. Notable improvement has also been observed in achieving goal number 5 on gender and goal number 16 on peace, justice, and strong institutions. The financing gap for SDG, which likely to be further widened due to the contraction of the economic consequent to the pandemic, is the biggest challenge for the Sri Lanka to achieving the SDG, as important progress we may make is under threat of being reversed. Engagement of and partnerships with the private sector would be critical to unlock new levels of investment as well as innovation and sustainable business models as catalysts for the accelerating SDGs. Several initiatives have been taken to drive private investment towards high SDG impact areas, such as development of Sri Lanka SDG investor map jointly by UNDP and the Sustainable Development Council, the development of sustainable financial framework and green taxonomy framework by the Central Bank of Sri Lanka, and the initiative to mobilize required resources from the innovative finance mechanism. We need further strengthen such collaboration and partnerships. I believe that creativity, know-how, technology, and finance resources from all sectors of the society are necessary to achieve SDG by the target year. This context, this dialogue is timely and relevant to promote more inclusive partnership with government and business sector, international development partners, civil society, and the other stakeholders. All of us are in agreement regarding our future course of. I am confident that the collective efforts of all of us will make Sri Lanka a sustainable nation for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Palpita, for outlining the National Action Plan to achieve the targets set out in Agenda 2030. Next, we warmly welcome Mr. Robert Jocam, UNDP Resident Representative in Sri Lanka and Board Member of UN Global Compact Network Sri Lanka, to speak on the importance of collaboration between private and public sector partnerships. Mr. Robert Jocam, over to you.
Thank you, Janani. Secretary Palpita, Mr. Fernando, Ms. Singer, Mr. De Silva, greetings. Good morning to everyone, to speakers, friends, colleagues, and participants. It's a real privilege to address you today as this Making Global Goals Local Business Conference gets underway. UNDP Sri Lanka is proud of and places a lot of hope and commitment towards our strong partnership with the UNGC Sri Lanka network. And, glad to see that this event, with all of its preparation and now actual participation, gets going. I hope my few remarks here will give a little food for thought on how private and public sector partnerships can address critical challenges, as all of you have just heard, especially acute from an SDG perspective, given that COVID-19 ravages both health outcomes and the range of socioeconomic outcomes and have pushed us back in terms of SDG achievement. I'd like to touch briefly on two sides to collaboration between public and private sectors, two sides of maybe the same coin, and reflect a little bit on implications. I want to hark back first to the eminent early 20th century economist, John Maynard Keynes. And Keynes challenged at the time what we'd call neoclassical political economists, who believed, if I were to simplify and put a little bit crudely, that purely capitalistic and or self-regulated markets solved everything, or even more simplified, provided the best basis for social organization. As Dilan just mentioned, the outdated thinking seems now today almost surreal. Keynes, on the other hand, argued that markets were irrational and failed to maximize resource allocation's efficiency, and that instead government regulation and interventions, policies and institutions can help create the necessary equilibriums between private profit and public good. For example, whether we look at a broad private-public collaboration or more narrowly defined real PPPs, private-public partnerships, which we define as private sector providing funding upfront for a public service and then getting a return via fees or other means as per contract with governments, whether one or the other. In the provision of social services or public services, such collaborations can help municipalities, for example, deliver certain public services for individual and community good, for household good, and doing so by doing so ideally in a manner which brings additional benefits like capital investments, infrastructure development, and or cost savings and efficiency gains. Of course, it doesn't always work out that way. There are good and bad examples to learn from, but Keynesians believe that government interventions can address issues of exploitation and inequality and wealth distribution. And we have witnessed over the past decades, and acutely in this decade just passed, that whilst global and national poverty, especially extreme poverty levels, have declined, and in some places quite radically, wealth inequality in the world has been growing tremendously in rich and poor countries alike. It's clear for centuries now that government intervention can also help preserve national environmental biodiversity and ecosystem assets that belong not just to one country or one community, but all humankind. Keynesians argued that citizen need should always be central to local decision-making, national decision-making, and that countries must prioritize citizen best interest over allowing private partner profits alone. Not that there shouldn't be private profits, but alone without citizen best interest, it can go nowhere. So, Keynesian economics basically supports a mixed economy, guided largely by the private sector, but partly operated even and regulated by the government. Lest this sound a little bit socialist in orientation, do note that, of course, in the 1980s, the neoliberal thinkers popularized the concept of public-private partnerships by even questioning the previously dominant Keynesian paradigm. And this is partly because Keynesians had no response to the concern of stagflation. You'll remember this was a phenomenon in the 70s and 80s. And interesting in this context are the recent global discussions about stagflation risks, whether because of supply side or other constraints. Keynes has passed, so what's the point? The point is that these certain truths that have been actually have been borne out in practice. The point is that PPPs have potential to exploit synergies through joint innovative use of resources and in the application of management knowledge with a kind of optimal attainment of the goals of all parties involved, and most importantly, the citizen. In a post-pandemic and climate vulnerable world, there's a need to really visualize this synergy, to do it in a way that's balanced. Flipping a coin, the good and bad sides of a PPP coin, we can see certain scenarios that follow one or the other side. On the head side of the coin, to use an example, if global plastic production continues on current trends, it may account for 20% of oil consumption by mid-century. So it's not a question just of polluting plastics in the oceans and on land. Making a biodegradable material strong enough to replace plastic is a tough task, but scientists and businesses, some of them smallish startups, are trying to do just that. Hence the euphemism bioplastics. And among the many innovative alternatives. A recent one by US startup caught my eye, and this is about a company that develops an edible, tasteless, and invisible plant-based spray for fruits and vegetables at market and shops that works as a barrier to keep oxygen out and moisture in, and this increases the shelf life without the need for single-use plastics. Now, this is just one small example, and these are not the only green claims that are promising. Claims of producing green products or services using net zero, zero carbon green methods. They do provide sustainable alternatives to countries and provide a good case for government to raise its budget for R&D and innovation, or to provide tax or other incentives or disincentives, like taxing or banning environmentally and socially degrading elements. To address this or similar development challenges and to provide a strong premise to collaborate with business. It's just one example of private and public sectors actioning a common agenda. On the tail side of the coin, we need to ask ourselves about downside risks. Evidence suggests that real PPPs have historically often tended to be more expensive than the alternative of public procurement. Evidence also has suggested that they fall short of delivering envisioned gains in quality of service provision. In other words, they can fail to yield value for money, taking into account not just financial costs and efficiency, but longer-term fiscal implications. And most importantly, from a UN Global Compact perspective, broader welfare benefits for society and achievement of the SDGs. So the question maybe is not how to eliminate risk, but rather how to allocate it best between participating parties, both investors of the private sector and governments. So rounding up here, to reach the neutral side of the coin, governments should support a coherent policy environment for businesses, make de-risking of private investments possible, encourage businesses to take risks, and provide strong tax and legislative foundations to drive PPPs, all the while protecting public interest and environmental assets. Private sector can and should ensure that market systems work for SDGs. Private sector should and can bolster green entrepreneurship and sustainable value chains, and can support governments to mobilize innovative financing tools such as blended finance and SDG bonds, and mobilize private equity to bridge the SDG financing gap. The public and the private can come together to deliver together. And remember, it pays to invest in SDGs. The SDGs could unlock $12 trillion in market opportunities. If we look at just 4 sectors, what happens if we look more broadly? And as businesses benefit from SDGs, the SDGs benefit from business too. If just a little more than 1% of global financial assets are reallocated, it has been recently said that this would unlock about $4.2 trillion, which is in fact the new SDG financing gap post-COVID, up by 1.7 trillion in 2020 from the 2.5 trillion financing gap prior. So again, UNDP is here to support the government in Sri Lanka and the private sector to help catalyze sustained transformation of market systems to drive PPPs with SDGs at the core. I want to thank and share kudos with our friends at UNGC Sri Lanka for bringing this great initiative together in collaboration with the Government Sustainable Development Council as well. And of course, the UN Resident Coordinator and the Resident Coordinator's Office and us at UNDP in Sri Lanka. Kudos for bringing the diverse range of stakeholders around this common agenda of the SDGs. This is especially important as the climate emergency sirens blare louder and pandemic impacts are far from over. Best wishes to all in understanding and sharing experiences across the thematic sessions spanning the 2 days as we all work to reinforce Sri Lanka's efforts to address and achieve the SDGs. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Robert Jocam, for your insightful comments on the importance of collaboration between private and public sector partnerships. On behalf of UN Global Compact Network Sri Lanka, we extend our gratitude to all the speakers who joined us for the opening session to kick off MGGLB Sri Lanka.